Oh, you got it right.
Alright.
Okay.
The drug war in America has lasted over 40 years at a cost of $1 trillion of thousands of lives and nothing to show for it, except an increase in supplies, cheaper drugs, and increased violence. My claim is that by legalizing all drugs in the U.S., we can benefit from this in many ways. I can support this claim by explaining to you how it can improve our justice system, our public safety, and the economy. The first way legalization can improve our justice system is by relieving our overcrowded prisons and jails of nonviolent offenders. Between 2001 and 2013, more than half the prisoners serving sentences of more than a year in federal facilities were convicted of drug offenses. More than 51% of the federal prison population were imprisoned for possession, trafficking, or other drug-related crimes, reported by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Our court system is choked with the escalating number of drug prosecutions, and our quadruple prison population has made building prisons the nation's fastest growing industry. With 2.3 million incarcerated a day and another 1.9 million arrested every year for nonviolent drug offenses, the United States now imprisons 1,009 per 100,000 people, 23 per capita, more than any other country in the world, 1.6 times as many as Russia, our closest competitor. With prisons and jails more crowded than ever, our tax dollars are paying for each and every person incarcerated. We could save billions of hard-earned tax dollars money and make room for violent offenders such as murderers, rapists, and robbers. In addition, by freeing up officers from drug-related tasks, investigations, fieldwork, they would have more time to spend looking for violent criminals, reducing the time it also takes to respond to 911 calls, which altogether will improve our justice system and create a more efficient government. Second, with the drugs being legalized, it will eliminate the black market for drugs. It is giving criminals a monopoly over their supply, driven by huge profits from this monopoly. Criminal gangs bribe and kill each other, law enforcers, and children. As prohibition on alcohol in the 1920s led to organized crime and increased violence, the same thing goes with drug prohibition today. Large amounts of the international drug trade value, which is valued at $88 billion per year, reported by the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, goes to funding terrorist organizations that produce these drugs. According to the United Nations World Drug Report in 2007, the potential value of Afghanistan's 2006 opium harvest occurring to all farmers, laboratory owners, and Afghan traffickers reached about $3.1 billion. In addition, it was reported that in 2004, some 400 tons of cocaine was exported from Latin America, a Latin American country, with an estimated domestic value of $2 billion. By removing the need for supply from these foreign and violent groups, we can reduce the profits they are receiving and lower the demand for their product, keeping the money in the American economy and keeping our country safer. Just as violence and organized crime was reduced after the ban of alcohol, the ban of alcohol was lifted when the government realized that it was not working. Third and finally, in legalizing all illegal drugs, we will be able to significantly stimulate the economy, generating billions in tax revenue, applying taxation and regulation to all drugs. The report estimates that legalizing drugs would save roughly $48.7 billion per year in government expenditure on law enforcement of prohibition, and $33.1 billion of these savings would accrue in state and local governments, while $15.6 billion would accrue for the federal government. Approximately $13.7 billion of these savings would result from legalization of marijuana, and $22.3 would be from the legalization of cocaine and heroin. 12.8 would be generated from the legalization of other drugs, says Jeffrey A. Marion with a PhD with the budgetary implications of drug prohibition from Harvard. While also the nearly 1 million people who would be let out of jails for nonviolent drug-related crime would create more jobs and more drug treatment programs and educational addiction programs, keeping people safer and teaching them the risks and benefits just as with other things today. In conclusion, And the legalization of all drugs would greatly benefit the United States in many ways, helping bring us out of debt and stimulate our economy while creating a safer environment for the citizens of America. Thanks.
All right, Kyle, at the beginning of the speech, I think you've got a pretty good start. You've got a well-organized preview. There's a clear statement of the proposition. You dance right up against the idea of making a claim of policy, but you stop short by focusing on what the outcome of this hypothetical policy would be. So it is mostly a conditional argument, and so you can stick, most of what you're talking about is pretty reasonable under the criteria for the assignment. The secondary issues are labeled as you get to them. I do think that there's some background information that needs to be a little bit more extensive, but you did a good job, for instance, in quantifying a lot of things when it came to the savings or how much money we're spending. I did think that it was problematic, though, that sometimes those numbers were not being given a source citation. At the very end, you had this whole list of statistic, we'd say 30 billion here and 10 billion there and 5 billion here and so on. And I'm listening to this, I'm going, well, where's all this information come from? Because I didn't hear a source citation. And then right at the end of that, you do give a source citation, and I'm not sure whether that is for everything that was in that particular point or just that list of statistical data, or maybe the last thing on that list. That's one of the reasons why it's important to give your source citations before the evidence. That was a little bit problematic. The number of prisoners that you had on the first point and drug offenses, that was pretty solid. Again, I do think you need to source that a little bit more. The analogy to prohibition needs to be developed a bit more. You basically take it as a given that there was a change in the behavior of the population and in the illegal activities there. And I think that's probably a safe assumption, but it wouldn't hurt to have some authority who's looked at it and said, that we got a substantial reduction in the amount of violence associated with this activity as a consequence of the legalization or the removal of prohibition. I do see that analogy. We're going to be talking about comparative arguments. I guess we're going to be doing that on Thursday because we're not going to be doing the test. So we'll get to those kinds of issues then. Presentation, I think, is a little problematic. You're doing a lot of reading. It's just coming out without any eye contact. And sometimes it sounds like you're not quite familiar with what your own argument is. I think you need to be a little bit more confident that you know what your main points are. So tell us those main points and stop reading them. And what you should read, if you need to read something, is just, like I said, the data information. You should be looking at us and telling us we spend way too much money sending people to prison for these kinds of things, instead of reading what you've written down there like it's an essay. There's a difference between, we've said this several times, there's a difference between oral argument and a written argument, and that's one of those differences. All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.